Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live-streamed goverete of a book chosen by you, our
Hello
slooshers.
and welcome to
My
the
name is
Doof
Matt
Book
Freeman,
Club,
and
our
you can
monthly
viddie my
live
droog
streamed
Scott Daly
goverete
here.
of a book.
Sorry, I was getting my version of the stream was playing audio and it really it really messed me up. I just ruined the intro, but I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about, Matt.
Well, that's just horror show, Scott, just horror show.
Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry I messed up that excellent intro. I was just panicking because I was hearing us 2 times and I didn't know what to do. Hello, and welcome. I hope you folks are having a wonderful Friday evening. I'm sure we know a lot of people in chat already, but if you happen to be just stumbling upon this, if the algorithm has blessed us with your presence, welcome. We are Matt and Scott, and we're Doof Media, and we make podcasts all about the stories we love. We also arrange, organize, and lead this monthly book club. Matt, please explain once again for the 47th time what a book club is.
Yes, so each month Scott and I will select 5 books from a pool of books submitted to us by our wonderful community. We put up a poll for all the supporters over on patreon.com/doofmedia, and we let them vote on which book they would like us to talk about at that month's book club. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it.
And then we meet here on the last Friday of the month, or in this case, the first Friday of the next month, has been the trend lately. We should just start saying the first Friday of the next month because that's the way it's been going.
Yeah.
And we spend an hour or so chatting about the book. Normally at this point, what we would do is we would open up the vote for next month's book as well, because we do a special thing where the folks that attend the live session get to have their say in what book we cover the next month. But this is a little bit different because there is not going to be a book club in the month of September, with the exception of the one that's occurring right now in the month of September. But we're not going to do a book this month. I have a baby on the way due in 12 days. So we're skipping the month of September, giving me some time off. So we're going to be back in October. And I believe October, Matt, is our semi-annual We Pick 'em as well. So I get to select the book for October. So I'm going to take my time here and figure out what to do. I'm thinking.
Well, yeah. Got plenty of time. Plenty of time.
But we're not here to talk about October. We're here to talk about now. And right now, we have a book to discuss. Matt, what book did our patrons end up picking for us for the month of August?
The patrons selected A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. And the summary is as follows. In Anthony Burgess's influential nightmare vision of the future, criminals take over after dark. Teen gang leader Alex narrates in fantastically inventive slang that echoes the violent intensity of youth rebelling against society. Dazzling and transgressive, A Clockwork Orange is a frightening fable about good and evil and the meaning of human freedom.
That's right. And of course, this book, most well known to you and me, Matt, from the Stanley Kubrick film that we both watched. Me when I was far too young, as we discussed on the Doofcast last night. But this is the first time we've read this book. I believe it's the first time I've read this book. It's the first time you read it, right? I'm not.
First time I've read it. Yep.
Yeah. So as Matt is about to explain to us what he thought overall of the book before we dive into the details, I want to hear from you folks in chat. Had you read A Clockwork Orange before this month, and what did you think of the book, Matt? What did you think of the book?
Well, I had so much fun with this book. I'm happy for the opportunity to sort of set the record straight, because everyone, including this book summary, seemed to think that this is some kind of serious fable about human nature, and it's clearly a comedy. And I will talk about what I mean by that, and I'm almost surprised. Like I'll be surprised if people don't understand what I mean, honestly. But yeah, it was very enjoyable. Like being in this protagonist's head was a very fascinating ride. I always love villains. I think that's part of why I love this book. Is I always love the villainous characters in all the books that we cover. This is no secret to our longtime listeners. And so basically a whole book where the protagonist is just a horrible, horrible villain. I just had a blast with it. And yes, the NADSAT is great. I had a lot of fun. The audiobook reader was one of my favorite audiobook readers ever. He really embodies Alex, and because it's this first person narration, it's just like you've got Alex in your ear telling you the
Mm,
story, and
yeah.
he's acting it, and it's really good. It's a really good audiobook. Strong recommend on the audiobook.
Nice. Nice.
Um, so that's all I'll say for now, and we'll get into the details later.
Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, I was kind of girding my loins a bit here when I approached this book. I was really ready for something incredibly difficult to get through. Not just like challenge of reading, but just tone and darkness and the events that occur. And I don't want to minimize the terrible events that occur in this book. Right, it's awful. Like there are monstrous things that happen in this book, but no, I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. Like it is really fascinating the way in which you do get suckered into the main character's point of view, and you're just kind of along the ride with him, while like in the back of your mind, like being conscious, like, oh, this is awful, oh, this is terrible, oh, this is monstrous, and it's fascinating what it's saying about people and society and blah blah blah. All those things that we're gonna spend some time tonight getting into, definitely are there and are fascinating and good and fun to talk about, as we will. But yeah, overall, the experience, the actual experience, the minute to minute, page to page experience of reading this book is delightful. Absolutely delightful. It's just a fun book to read, which is not what I was expecting at all.
Yeah,
Um,
you know, uh, maybe I'll just say one thing, and then we'll go into the audience responses. Just like the horrible stuff that happens to me is serving a very interesting function where obviously you're like, wow, this guy sucks.
yeah.
He's awful.
Uh huh.
Um, and then you're laughing at him when terrible things happen to him.
Yeah.
So it kind of reminds me of like the scene in Pulp Fiction when they accidentally shoot the guy in the back of their car in the face,
Sure.
and it's like his head explodes and it's horribly violent. But you're laughing at the absurd excess of violence, and then you're kind of laughing at Travolta and Jackson
There you go.
because they're kind of idiots, and that's kind of the vibe with Alex for me. Is it's like the violence rarely, not never, but rarely was like, oh, this is heavy. Usually it was an almost Tarantino-esque like exaggeration. Anyway, that we'll talk about the violence in more detail.
Yeah.
Got a lot of really interesting comments. Appy enjoyed it immensely. Chris was really anxious after hearing some negative stuff about it, but still loved it.
Same.
Said that it was fun how dark it could be. I agree with that.
Yeah, David says he read it as a 20-year-old first, reread it as a 40-something, and enjoyed it immensely both times. Bishop says they read it for the first time and enjoyed it more as they went through it. Yeah, I think this is an interesting thing I really want to talk about. Obviously, we have to talk about the one main gimmick of this book, which is the language of it. I don't know. I know you approached it via the audiobook. I was kind of there were times where I was tempted in this book to just like pull out Google and just Google what some of these words meant, and I consciously stopped myself from doing that. I was like, no, nobody who was reading this book originally in 1975 could do that. They just had to read the book and they just had to figure it out. And when you stop like consciously trying to think and decipher and you just let it wash over you, it's kind of amazing how your brain just starts translating the stuff. Because I think Burgess did a really clever job here where he does give you enough hints in every line in this book that gives you an answer for what each one of these words mean without ever. He does. I think there's like 2 or 3 times where Alex stops and says blah 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 means this, right? Like there's a couple times where he does that, but for the most part he never stops to do that.
Yeah.
But it is amazing how he gives you just enough context to decipher the words. And I mean it's like the Matrix, right? By the end of it, you're not seeing the words anymore. You're just understanding it.
That was certainly, I think, amplified by the audiobook where, there's no chance to even stop. It's just washing over you. And, for the first few minutes of the book, it was a calibration where I'm like,
Yeah.
Am I supposed to be able to understand this? But then, before too long, you're like, I slushy this Malinky Vec gov reading, and I'm like, I understood everything that he just said perfectly,
Yeah.
even though only the first word of that sentence was English, um, and it's just perfectly perfectly intelligible and translatable, and it's funny. I've taken language courses, but I've never really learned another language to like a speaking level.
Yeah.
And I was actually kind of delighted because I was like, oh, I'm just like hearing the words and apprehending their meaning without
Yeah.
having to actively translate them. Maybe this is what it's like to understand another language.
Yeah, no,
Anyway,
I think it is. I think that there, I've taken a few years of Spanish, and I can't speak it very well at all. I can usually get by understanding people when they're talking it, but I can't speak it very well. And there is a transition that you go from hearing a word, consciously translating the word to its English meaning, and then moving from just hearing the word and knowing what it means and not having that intermediate step. And that definitely happens in this book with words like I think Bishop's pointing out, or no, it's Chris that's pointing out horror show, which is such a fun word that means good.
uh-huh.
and yet you hear the word, and your initial reaction to that is the exact opposite of that. And so there was definitely a time where I remember like seeing horror show, mentally flagging that, and mentally in my head saying, no, this means good, this is a good thing when he says this word. And then but yeah, by the end of it, you're just not having to do that step anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really did enjoy that. I found it
Yeah.
very delightful. It's I guess I find it somewhat interesting that no one that I know of has really ever tried this again. Like we've read a bunch of books,
Uh-huh.
and we've read books where people have, made up words, because we've read fantasy and sci-fi books where they're made up words, but they're usually nouns. They're usually
Yeah.
not every word in a sentence.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just interesting that he got away with this and nobody else ever tried it again.
The only thing I can think of off the top of my head is the book Cloud Atlas,
Mm.
in which there's you know the structure of that story because you've seen the movie, and there's the far in the future section. They speak kind of a messy, mixed up language of a lot of slang, and that's the only comparison I can make. I think I like David Mitchell a lot. I liked Cloud Atlas a lot. I think I don't think it's controversial to say that Anthony Burgess does it better than Cloud Atlas. But yeah, no, it's a really interesting thing. It's the thing, I think this is a really great book, and I think it's going to be fun to talk about. There is one question I have, kind of for everyone, is do you think this book would have been as impactful and long lasting and well regarded if it didn't have this different language conceit to it? If it just told the same story but told it straight up without the slang in it. What do you think, Matt?
Um, I think there's a chance not, because part of what the language does is it creates this alternate reality atmosphere, distance between you and the things that are happening. Like I actually think it serves the book's interests that when you're reading like a violent rape scene, you're actually at the same time kind of trying to puzzle out what exactly he's saying still.
Mm-hmm.
And it puts your brain in a slightly different stance. And I think that permits him to go certain places where it's not that he couldn't go there, but it would feel different if he went there, just baldly saying what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why the movie is a totally different beast than the book, to me anyway. Like, because when you're showing it and you're seeing these horrible things happen, like
Mm-hmm.
there's no black humor, there's no flavor of humor whatsoever. It's just like, oh my god, oh my Jesus,
Yeah.
they're just attacking these people and it's horrible. Whereas when it's, you know, the delightful red Cravi, that's like it's like a goofy word. You can kind of smile at it, and you're not necessarily visualizing what Stanley Kubrick put to film. So I do think the language is actually important to the functioning of the novel. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree completely. I think it reminded me of the conversation we had this week about Barry Lyndon and talking about Kubrick's choice to film the movie in a certain way, to use natural lighting wherever possible, and to create these very specific still framed images. That wasn't just like a fun conceit that he woke up one day and said, oh, I just want to try this because I think it's going to be a challenge. It's integral to what the movie is doing. And I think the same as with the language here. This wasn't just this is a fun writer challenge I'm gonna have to see if I can write this book in this half slang. It is absolutely integral to what this book is doing. It is. I mean, a lot of the book is kind of shining a light on the youths. And the disconnect with the language of the youths is actually a huge part of this, for sure. And so I think it's a brilliant idea. I agree with you. It's kind of shocking it hasn't been copied more, because it's such a brilliant idea. And also, I can't help but, this is the elder millennial in me coming out. I can't help but listen to some of this slang and then look at the way you see some of Gen Z folks talk and be like, this is the same shit, man. This is like, they say shit and you're just like, what the fuck does that, what? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, so I think, who was it here that said, Chris mentioned the timelessness of it. This is absolutely true. The slang is different, but like, there is one truism as you age. The generation younger than you is going to be using words and phrases that don't make any fucking sense to you.
And it's gonna be the stupidest thing you ever heard too. Like as a rule, right?
Yeah,
It's like the next generation intentionally selects everything to be the worst thing ever, to your ears specifically.
Yeah.
And their fashion, that's another bit that I loved, is it doesn't happen very often, and it kind of reminds me of American Psycho, but like he'll describe what people are wearing, and he always is like, yes, we were wearing our, I forget what it is, like, top hats and suspenders with, hip waders on.
Yeah.
In the height of fashion. And every time he was dressed in the height of fashion, and then describes the stupidest outfit you've ever heard.
Yeah.
And that's how it is. It's ridiculous, right? Nobody has ever really dressed this way, but like that's the way we always feel about the youths. They're always dressed in the height of fashion.
Have you heard? You have kids, and you have kids that are starting to get to the age where they might start picking up some of the slang. Have you heard about Riz?
I mean, I'm on Twitter, so I've heard about Riz on Twitter. I've never heard about Riz from one of my kids.
It just means charisma. Did you know that? That's all it means. It just means charisma.
Yeah, I figured out that it means charisma, and then somebody postulated that there should be a whole typology where instead of intelligence we have tell, and instead of strength we have angth, and etc.
On God, no cap.
Yeah, on God, no cap. Yeah, like and the Gen Z, their haircuts are the stupidest haircuts anybody's ever had. You should just go on, and it's an intentional rejection of what came before, right? That's always what the youths are doing.
Yeah, which absolutely does make this timeless. Like I think people could be reading this book in 100 years and they'd be like, yeah, this is spot on with the generation that I'm dealing with right now, and this change and shift. And it is interesting. This is, as we kind of start to move into what this book is actually doing. It is really interesting that like we feel this separation from the next generation. It's funny, you said the next generation, and my brain immediately meant why is he talking about Star Trek? And then I was like, oh no, wait, no, the next. Yeah, I got it. We feel this disconnect from the next generation, and we feel this fear of the next generation, right? There's this idea that like, oh, these people are not like we used to be, and we didn't behave this way when we were their age. But the interesting thing about this book is this generation is actually incredibly violent and awful, right? Like legitimately just awful. And I don't know, what is this book about, Matt? What was your read on kind of what this book is saying?
Well, I guess it's hard to talk about that without talking about the last chapter.
Sure. Yeah. Let's do that. Let's get into that, because that's a huge deal.
So I guess preface for people who either haven't read it or didn't know this, there was like an American version released when this book came out that did not have the last chapter of the book. And then there's like the British/international version, I guess, had this last chapter added. The film basically ends without that last chapter. It ends with, oh, I was cured all right, Kubrick staring into the camera, end of the movie. And the last chapter, which was in the copies that both you and I had
Yep.
in the audiobook, of course, really, really changes the feeling of the book and inevitably changes what your takeaway is going to be. Because in it, Alex, it's a few months later. Alex is back hanging out with a totally different set of droogies, but he's like bored and not really into the violence. And and then he sees one of his old friends, and they've like moved on, they've kind of grown up, and they have a wife. And he's like, a wife. And he's like, and then he like envisions having a child of his own. And he realizes like, oh no, I'm like growing out of the old ultra violence. But he's kind of into it. And the implication is like, kids are kids. They're gonna be crazy. They're gonna be wild. They're gonna be beyond the pale in every way that offends you, dear reader. And then they're gonna grow out of it. And so I think this super exaggeration of all the horrors of the stuff Alex gets up to is it's meant to take the actual way that we feel about the youths and exaggerate it, obviously,
Yeah.
and then be like, they're gonna grow out of it though. Like and every adult in the movie, in the book rather, is obviously wrong about what's happening, because what's happening is just the youths are being the youths,
Yeah.
and they all have like a different, very specific, diagnosis of the cause of these social ills.
And
You know,
and desperate attempts to try to fix them, right? Like throwing everything they can at the problem, trying to do whatever they can, manipulating, changing, rewriting people's wants, like all these horrible things that the adults are doing to these kids that are themselves horrible, and it is ultimately meaningless and pointless because they're just going to grow out of it. It's crazy to me that anybody published this book without that chapter in it. It's fucking wild, because I totally agree with you. It completely changes everything. It's like I remember going into this chapter or this book and getting to that end and being like, I mean, I knew the story from the movie, but I kind of had chalked that up to just Kubrick being Kubrick, and I was like, I was waiting for something else, and I was like, okay, so it's just that, huh? And then you move into this chapter, and it's like, oh, oh, I see, I see what you're doing. And Bishop says it was removed because it was seen as unrealistic, less appealing, and inconsistent with the rest of the novel. That's wild to me, because it's the conceit of the novel.
That's the thing, is the novel is unrealistic.
Yeah.
Like I don't think farce is quite the right word, but it's in the neighborhood of the right word. Like the novel is a massive exaggeration meant to be unrealistic and completely over the top at every turn. And the idea that the character who committed all these horrible acts is just going to be like, I'm bored now.
Yeah.
Gonna go get married. It's like totally in keeping with the tone of the novel.
Well, yeah.
I had mixed feelings about it when it was like washing over me, because I'd had the movie in my head for decades.
Yeah.
And I was like, Alex is just this timeless villain, and ending on that, oh, I was cured all right, is just like it's just a great ending to a movie.
Yeah.
But this is a totally different story fundamentally with that ending, because it and the point is different, because I feel like with the movie you walk away from it with classic Kubrick ambiguity, just like, well, what was the point though? Like, what was the lesson? What was the moral? And the book kind of leaves you with the moral. It's like, they'll grow out of it. That's the moral.
Yeah. It's incredible. The one thing you didn't say is, not only as Alex is kind of imagining what it would be like to have children, the thing he basically says here is, and then my kids are going to get up to the same thing that I did. Like I wish I could, I think he says something effective like, I wish I could explain to my future children like all this stuff and get them to avoid all this wasted time, and then he just kind of chalks it up to, but I know that won't be successful. I won't be able to do it. He won't be able to, his kids. And it's just this admission of, we actually have no control over being young. You can't force being young out of a person. And I agree with you. Like it is a really interesting conceptual idea to take the fear that we have of the younger generation and literalize that and make it extreme via these horrific acts of violence that he did. And I don't want to, like, the thing is, I don't want to minimize, I don't want to say like we're minimizing murder and rape and all these terrible things, but we're not. But it's just like the book is doing this very specific thing where it's a fantasy world, right? It's an invented extreme version of a world in which we're making these things maximally scary and disturbing in order to really land this point.
I don't think the Tarantino reference is off base because I think Tarantino was influenced by Kubrick.
Sure.
I think the idea of I don't think we're being dismissive or whatever in saying that like the violence is intentionally over the top to the point of being ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be funny how ridiculous it is.
Mm-hmm.
And like Alex's whole tone is this he's such an idiot so much of the time.
Yep.
Like when he sneaks into the woman's house, or when he rather tricks his way into the woman's house with all the cats, and then like trips and falls, and I forget what happens. It's utter slapstick.
He lands on cats. He trips and falls and lands on top of cats, and they scream and yell and attack him. And it's comedy.
It's slapstick comedy, and then it's like, oh, the woman died. It's like that's like a punchline. That's just a dark comedy punchline, in keeping with all the rest of the violence, where you're just like laughing at how evil this guy is, and then laughing at all of the suffering he goes through because he sucks and he deserves it.
Yeah,
like that was a remarkably unique thing about the book, actually, is that simultaneously it's this very close first person narration, and also I was just like laughing at the character when bad things would happen to him, because I was like, this guy sucks. He's incredibly entertaining. I'm really enjoying his narrative. But he sucks, and it's funny when bad things happen to him. And I don't know that I've ever quite experienced that exact thing before.
Yeah, I mean, the entire the book is kind of divided into 3 parts, right? Each of which, I think, what is the phrase that begins each part of this book? I thought that was really clever. He has the same sentence that starts each of the 3 parts of the book and then starts the final chapter as well. I'm killing time as I'm opening up my book and looking right
sure.
The phrase is, "What's it going to be then, eh?" Is every part of this book starts with that phrase. What's it going to be then, eh? So we move into the second one, and we see him tortured horribly. We see the one thing that he loved, which was music, taken away from him, and the adults are so indifferent to that. Like, I think the reaction of the doctor was like, well, the government will be happy because they're getting their punishment too, because now he can never enjoy music ever again. And then you have this priest, this chaplain, who's just incredibly horrified by this whole thing, and no one cares what he thinks.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, like, he's an alcoholic, and he is like obviously just totally ineffectual.
Yeah.
And the other fun thing I like, where the book becomes maybe a little heavy-handed, but I still enjoyed it, was basically going through and sort of meticulously dismantling all these people's highfalutin theories, where we take the clergyman and we're like, I got into reading the Bible because I enjoyed reading about all of the beheadings and dismemberments, and it was really fun.
It got way less interesting in the second half, is what Alex says.
Yeah, no, it's so good. It's so funny, right? It's so like I might be annoyed at the preachiness of the book in these places if it wasn't hilarious. I like the parts where he's reading the newspaper about some guy who's like, the children need to be brought up in the arts because only through the arts can they touch like transcendence and goodness. Yeah. And Alex is this guy who's this music lover. He loves Beethoven. He loves classical music, and that's like that's the best juxtaposition for me, is this monster who loves Beethoven more than anybody alive.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you're not gonna. That's not gonna do it. And putting him in prison is just going to turn him into a monster.
Yep.
And the church is not going to reform him. And the Levitico technique is, I mean, it'll stop him from doing any crimes, but he's still a monster on the inside, which I guess maybe society doesn't care.
Yeah.
He never really feels remorseful, even when he is under the influence of the conditioning. I'm trying to remember what else there was. There were other things,
Well, the Levitico technique is so fascinating because it is even more complicated than I think the movie made it out to be, right? Like I think the movie is just simply, oh, whenever he tries to do something bad, he feels sick, and I think that the reality of that is actually more complicated because I like what the book did with the idea that not only does he feel sick when he even thinks about doing something bad, but he is compelled to do something good to make that feeling go away, which is really fascinating. And I mean, the book outright asks the question, like, if you remove free will from a person, are they actually good anymore, right? If they're not making choices, if they're not making their own choices, are have you done anything? Have you made a good person? It's like, no, you've made a person that will fall in line with whatever you've conditioned the moral correctness to be. But there's also like I don't know, like it's really fascinating. He's like getting beat up by old men and he can't defend himself, right? Like this, sometimes you have to be able to do violent things sometimes, right? Like sometimes that's necessary, and that this technique doesn't have any room for any of that stuff, and it's just awful and horrible and ineffectual, and it's
Yeah.
perfect.
It's also, it was very funny when he got beaten up by the old man too.
Yeah.
Speaking of the book being hilarious.
Oh yeah, Bishop. This is great. Bishop says that after they condition him, they say that prison just taught him to be two-faced and pretend to be reformed. But yeah, he was already doing that before he even went to prison. That had nothing to do with prison. He was doing that with his parents. He was doing that at home. Yeah, he was always doing that.
All of their theories are wrong, basically. Yeah, and that's why I wouldn't say he's like literally totally unique in literature, but he is fairly unique for just being a through and through monster with no redeeming qualities.
Yeah.
And yet also you kind of like him.
It's a really fascinating test to like how the human brain works with storytelling, where like you hang out with a guy long enough, you're like instinctively start to like him because that's just how our storytelling brain works. He's the protagonist, so we just start to kind of like him a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, you like him, but you also laugh at him when bad stuff happens.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I mean, not that this is, the newest thing to say about this book, but just to riff on what you're saying, that the Clockwork Orange title is, the sort of the first most obvious thing that people say is that it's this idea of orang is man in the Malaysian language, and the book is full of these sort of cross-linguistic references. So a clockwork orang would be like a clockwork man, which is like a living thing that looks like it should be alive and full of vibrancy, but it's actually, been replaced. Its interiority has been replaced with a machine, and that's the idea of the conditioning. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is the central idea, is that like we as a society consistently look at the latest generation, and through our fear of them and our inability to understand them, attempt to control them and transform them into what our version of what a person should be. And part of being young is bucking against the traditions of your elders and seeking out something new for you. That's part of the slang, right? Yeah, as you said, why are they talking different? Well, because it's a rejection of the way people talked before, and no one's consciously doing this. It's just this is the way it happens, and we're constantly trying to. And it's this really interesting push and pull between, like, as a parent, you're supposed to try to like be guiding your child to become a quote unquote good person, right? That's part of your job as a parent, is to teach the correct way to live, the correct way to make moral choices and to be good and to be kind and helpful and do all these things. You're trying to do that, but also at some point they stop being people you can control and they become autonomous creatures that make their own choices and make their own decisions, and there will always be this generational disconnect. There will always be, for every generation, for all time, we'll be looking at the new generation going, I don't get these people, I don't understand them and why they like to do these things and why they don't like to do the things that I like to do. Their music's weird, their slang's weird, they dress weird, it makes me uncomfortable. And that's just life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the other I forgot the other example of sort of the authority figures being you know, totally certain of themselves but also totally wrong and also hypocrites was
Yeah.
you know, F. Alexander, the author of A Clockwork Orange, you know, within the frame of the story,
Yeah.
where he has strongly held political beliefs about the sanctity of free will and the necessity of having, you know, moral responsibility fall unto, you know, the individual. And then when he realizes that, oh, this is the guy who did crime against me personally,
Mm-hmm.
we lock him in the attic and we torture him until he jumps out the window.
Yeah.
Um, and I love that because you almost think, you know, oh, you know, here's a guy with principles. Finally, here's a guy with principles, and it's like, no, that,
Well, even all his friends like were gonna use him anyway. Like they didn't care about
yeah,
him. They didn't care about his condition or him as a person. They saw him as another thing they could use to get the way they want, and that's like all sides, everything. Yeah, it's all bullshit. Yeah, I
mhm,
love that too. That's a great point.
yeah. You know, one thing that jumped out to me about the book is just you know, Alex's age. He's like 15,
Yeah.
which I guess makes perfect sense. I think the only thing about it that surprised me is that obviously Malcolm McDowell is definitely not 15. Um, that's his name, right? The actor in
Yes.
A Clockwork Orange.
Yes. Yes.
So 15 just seems very young, but it's like, well, that's the whole point is we're talking about, you know, the youths, high school aged youths who are, you know, very kind of, you know, unformed even at the neurological level, to say nothing of the social level. And they're, you know, they're practically animals. Um,
Yeah, I was shocked at his age. And I don't remember. Maybe I just missed it. Where earlier in the book they told what his age was, but there's a one where it's like it feels like an intentional design by Anthony Burgess, where it's like, and me, just a young lad of 15, was like the punctuation point on a chapter, and I was like, what,
yeah,
15? And this is another thing I think we do as we grow older is like, we infantilize older and older people, right? Because
hmm,
the farther away from 15 you are, the younger 15 looks and feels. Where when you were 15, you felt on the cusp of adulthood. Oh, I'm basically an adult. I'm basically there. I'm about to drive, and then in no time at all, I'll be in college, and then I'll be an adult. Like, but yeah, to me at 37, 15 feels like a baby.
yeah,
And that was my reaction when I heard 15. It's like, oh
yeah.
my god.
Well, exactly. And I mean, it's interesting. It did play an interesting trick on me because I was like, I mean, does his age alleviate his culpability or can it be considered mitigating in any way? And it's like, well, the book sure goes all out to make him seem like a total monster.
Mm-hmm.
And then it implies that he's going to grow out of it. So it's like, to me, it posed a very interesting and sort of troublesome question about like how much should we hold people responsible for things that they did when they were younger? Because
Hmm.
when you're young, you know, when you're 15, you're literally like not, your brain is not done growing.
Sure.
You're dumber, you're more impulsive,
Yeah.
your hormones are going crazy. And it's like, oh, Matt, are you excusing the things that Alex did? It's like, no, but like the book is definitely posing age and aging as things that play into these moral questions, actually.
Yeah, no,
Um,
fantastic point. I completely agree. It is something that I think you're supposed to struggle with. Is this central idea because he seems so aware of what he is doing, right? Like, but also like his worldview and his indifference and his monstrosity seems to be brought on by not, I don't want to say conditioning, and as I'm talking about this, I see Chris is asking about his parents, which is a great place we should go after this line of thinking. But yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely something like there's a reason why we generally have collectively decided as a society that there are some decisions that someone of 15 years old is not allowed to make, right?
Mhm.
We have decided you do not have the mental capacity to make that decision, and of course that varies person to person, and everyone's different, but you have to draw a definitive line somewhere, and we've drawn them.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I think it's this. I don't think like culpability is one of those things where like, okay, even if it's not his fault, he still did it, right? Like, we talked a lot about when we were reading The Shining. We talked a lot about alcoholism as a disease, as a disease that people suffer from, and it's like, are you responsible for the fact that you are genetically predisposed to have this disease? No, that's not your fault. It is. Does that make you not responsible for any of the things you do when under the influence of the disease? No, right? And I think there's something similar here to me.
Yeah. I agree. I agree with all that. I mean, it made me think more about this question than I have.
Yeah.
And so Chris asks about the parents and what role, what responsibility they have. Chris says they seem a bit neglectful. They seem to play along with the charade. I think that's the book wants us to ask that question, but I don't think the book offers an answer to it because
Yeah.
yes, they seem kind of checked out, but also I think it's from my opinion is that Alex has just got them overmatched. Like he's just got him in check constantly.
Mm-hmm.
There's no he's got it all figured out. He's smart, he's wily, he's clever. They don't have like the resources to it's not like the fact that he says he's like, hey, I got a second job, I got a night job, I'm gonna go make some money. It's like, well, they need that money because they're struggling,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're kind of willing to overlook the fact that it doesn't the details don't quite add up. So I mean, I guess in the end, it's like, yeah, they have some culpability, but also, doesn't society and doesn't
Yeah.
it's like at a certain point, you're just like, okay, like, but what does this all add up to? Like, okay, but what do we do about this?
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know. I don't know. The book is fairly sort of nihilistic to that question, where it's like, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
just,
I,
just,
absolutely. I think that is the
yeah,
book. The book is kind of saying exactly that. Hey, there's really nothing. There's really nothing you can do. Um, and I think we're probably a bit more predisposed to be sympathetic to the parents because we're parents. And like here, for those of you out there that aren't a parent, here's a little secret: we don't know what we're doing. We're just kind of feeling our way through it. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I would be equipped as a parent to handle a kid like Alex. I don't know what I
yeah,
would do. I would like to think I would be a little more attentive. I would like to think I would choose the health of my kid over the fact that he's bringing in money every day and not really and not choose to look the other way. I certainly would hope I would behave that way, but I don't know.
yeah.
He's a smart kid. He's a very intelligent kid that knows how to read people and knows how to manipulate people.
Right.
And they are completely ill prepared for that.
Yeah, and they're in denial about the reality of the fact that
Yeah.
he is that way.
Yeah. You
I
don't
mean,
want to
yeah,
believe that that's
I
your
think
kid.
also, when you don't have kids, it's easy to say like, oh, the parents shouldn't have made him that way or what. It's like that's not how it works. Like, but, I have 3 kids who are old enough to have fully developed personalities, and it's like, yeah, they all came out different. They're all just different people, and it's nothing I did. It's just the way they are. They've always been that way. I mean, maybe I'm responsible for 5%. Maybe their siblings are responsible for 5%, whatever. I'm making up these numbers, obviously, but
Yeah. Who knows?
you just don't have that much control. You don't have any control. You barely have any influence when it comes
Yeah.
to the kind of person they are. And Alex is such a exaggeration of that type that it's just like, yeah, they never stood a chance.
This is actually one of the things I'm most looking forward to about having a second kid here in 12 days.
Yeah.
Is, I think when you have one kid like I do right now, you look at his personality and you go, oh, look what we did. He's a great
Uh-huh.
kid. Look what we did. We're doing great. And then I'm really looking forward to having a different kid, we'll do the same things or similar things. And I'm sure we'll turn out just 100% different, right? And that's just
Yeah.
the way they work. Because yeah, that's that constant question of nature and nurture, and where does someone's base personality where does that come from? Where how is that set? How was that created? And of course, it's a combination of many things, but a lot of them I think are just completely out of our control. So,
Yeah.
no, it's gonna be fascinating. I can't wait. I'm just having kids to perform science experiments. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. That's why we do anything.
Steve asks, is the current kid generation playing out a bit like Clockwork Orange? I think we were talking about this a bit earlier before you got on, Steve. I don't think so. I think, I mean, I think it is very generational to look at this whole situation and be like, okay, I know everyone said this throughout our history, but this time we're right. And this time, this actually is the worst generation. This time,
Yeah.
I'm totally right about this.
Yeah.
I think it's just a cycle.
And I think basically repeating myself, I think it's because the way the youths choose to behave is often an explicit rejection of the, immediately preceding generations, meaning you're going to feel particularly offended because the choices they're making are in particular opposition to you.
Yeah.
But and also like part of me, my reaction when you said that, Steve, was like, this is a generation who never leaves the house. So
it's true.
So I don't really see, that actually. I see them as being, if anything, I wish they'd get up to more shenanigans as a group.
Yeah. I mean, I think you and I were talk about this on the other show all the time about how like we grew up in the sex crazed 80s and 90s where like TV was just dripping with sex all the time, and this latest generation has kind of consciously rejected that, where all the time there's people this latest generation saying, do we really need sex scenes in movies? And you and me are like, yeah, 100%. And it is this is one of those generational gap things where I look at these arguments and I'm like, you don't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't understand you.
It's funny. I've been showing my kids Futurama, which I thought of as a very like safe, normal, middle of the road, family friendly show. And every episode is about sex.
Yeah, man. We were kind of obsessed with it. This is like it came out of the sexual freedom of the 60s and the 70s into the 80s, just kind of got obsessed with a certain kind of sexuality, and then I think this is the pendulum, right? It swings the other way.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned Futurama. Like, obviously, all of the comedies in the '90s were about sex, but Futurama, I remembered it as being like, oh, this is a thing I watch with my family.
Yeah.
And no, it was all about sex constantly.
I remember how much my parents hated Friends, the sitcom, and hated me watching it because it's like all these people do is sit around and talk about the sex that they have with other people. That's all they do. And I was like, yeah, what's the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I really do think there's something. We talked about this in the Discord a long time ago. Just like something weird about the millennials and how sex and relationships, how millennials view sex and relationships is different from the previous generations and different from the ensuing generations.
Yep.
Because of the media we were just deluged with.
Yep.
It was this very specific like program of how you were supposed to think about sex and how you were supposed to think about relationships.
Yep. 100%.
I almost this is going to sound weird, and this is maybe a parenting moment that has nothing to do with Clockwork Orange, or maybe it does because this is a book about growing up, but like I'm so much more aware of the impact of the surrounding culture on your views of like sexual mores, morality in general, that I realize I have no power to control how my kids see these things because I absorbed it from TV.
Yeah.
My parents certainly didn't teach me anything I think about sex.
Yeah. Mine neither. Yeah.
And that's terrifying because I realize my kids are going to get their ideas from God knows what.
Roblox.
And I can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean that's the to attempt to steer this ship right back into the book we're supposed to be talking about. I think that's the thing that drives the terror that makes a story like this work is the realization and the absolute fear at the fact that we have so little control over some of the stuff, and our desperate desire to want to have control over it, to want to, if we do just this one thing, we can fix it. We can fix this. We can fix that. We can fix, and also it mixed in with all those possible well-meaning, well-intentioned ideas of wanting to fix things, aka make them more like we know it and more comfortable with it. There's also all kinds of other stakes and dealing and like, it is really interesting the ways in which some of this is just about removing the political power that's in power right now and replacing it with a political power that happens to align with our values, right? And it has nothing to do with the children. The children are just a tool that is weaponized to do that, to either hold on to power or take power. And like that's it's this stuff. Like, I believe there are characters in this book that are well-meaning in the idea of like, I think that the youths are bad, and in this book they actually are. And I want to fix that, and that's mixed in with, I think I see an advantageous benefit of doing something or thinking about this or positioning myself around this, and it's a very, very nihilistic book, I think.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean it's inaccurate. I don't know. I guess would you say, Matt, that you agree with the conclusion of this book, that this is just the way it works?
Well, you put it to me directly. I mean, definitely it made me able to just laugh off the idea that like, oh, we're going to have this, political program and it's going to fix the social problem of the young people behaving badly. Mm-hmm. Because you're like, no, of course that's not going to work. That's stupid. That, and the book, I think, does a good job of illustrating all the ways in which that's stupid. It uses this exaggerated character of Alex and these exaggerated situations to make that point. But I think it's basically true that the olds are always, reacting to the youth, and in a way that's just inept, and the youth are never going to accept it. And that's basically, not that we can't solve any of our problems, but the specific idea that we're going to like make the youth shape up into the fine, upstanding people that we are, because we're so great. It's foolish, actually.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That was probably not a very satisfying answer. What do you think?
No, I think you weaseled your way into a satisfactory answer there without directly answering the question.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I do think the latest generation is the worst one and is terrible, and we have to do something about it immediately. But, other than that.
I mean, I think all we need to do about it is give them driver's licenses or like force them to get out of the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Chris asks, any thought on Dim becoming a police officer? I thought it was interesting that he ends up doing basically the same kind of violence and bullying, whereas Alex and Pete leave that behind in the end. Yeah, that's interesting. It's another example of what we're talking about, where like these so-called terrible youths that are destroying the country are co-opted by the people in power when they can see advantage in it. Like, they don't care about them. And I hadn't thought about this, but this is an interesting idea of, if you let them alone, they will grow at it eventually. If you try to remove it, it won't work. And if you also cultivate it, you will leave them in a state of sort of arrested development, right? I think maybe that's kind of where Dim is, right? Where he's not forcefully changed, but he's also not left alone, and so he never grows out of it.
You could also, I mean, he's kind of textually not smart. Like he could just not be capable of anything else other than violence. Sure. Like as a job. Sure. But yeah, I think definitely the idea that, like you just said, that the world can just use you to use violence to keep the status quo in power. Yeah. That's I mean, there's something very dark and nihilistic about the idea of like a few lashings of the old ultra violence are totally fine if it's in service of the state's power. Yeah. But the same exact behavior, if it's just for your own gratification, is obviously completely beyond the pale.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the book is, I think, getting us to think about.
I'm going to make a little stretch here and we'll see if this works. I wonder if this is kind of a metaphor or critique for the way in which we push our youth into military service.
Sure.
You know, we kind of exploit this young, specifically in young men, this desire, this pent up energy and desire to do manly, strong things, right? And we like, oh, we can use that. We like this to your exact point. This idea of when this kind of aggression and energy serves the state, let's channel that into that. But anywhere else, no. I think we do this to young men all the time, women too, of course. But yeah,
sure. Definitely agree. I mean, I think we're somewhat. I'm definitely somewhat thinking about the book we just read recently, The Long Walk, where it's very much about the way young men are sort of, digested by society.
Mm-hmm.
And this book, there's some alternate dimension where in this book, instead of going to prison, Alex is, conscripted into the military, and certain things would be very similar in terms of the evolution of the plot, right?
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah.
It's it could even go off in a very different direction, but you can sort of see the broad strokes of what that story would be, because I just agree it fits in very well.
Yeah.
With the metaphor.
There's no Vietnam in this book, right? But I do think it's interesting that one of the ways they condition Alex is through a lot of war imagery, right? It's specifically World War II. There's a lot of Nazi and horrible killing of Jewish people in there, but there's also just a lot of war imagery, right? And so like that, you can draw a specific line to being forced to view war imagery on a screen in front of you to being sent off to war and having to experience that stuff. So I think there's something there. I think you're spot on there.
I agree. I wanted to comment on the specific imagery they showed, because you're right. It was like the same things. It was like Holocaust video and World War II like combat video. Was there a third thing in there?
Probably.
No. I guess there were just sometimes, and there were just other horrible things. So no, it wasn't just random people. It wasn't all war imagery, but
it did seem to focus a lot on Holocaust imagery specifically.
Yeah. I guess it's just, I thought that was interesting, because it's like, what are we saying by? I think, I wonder if I was being like overly cynical, but I was like, the Holocaust is the sort of big headline worst thing that's ever happened, and so we're going to use that as our material to condition this kid against violence. Even though, like, as I was imagining it, I was like, nothing that Alex is doing is anything like putting people in a gas chamber. That's a totally different idea.
Yeah.
And this is like lazy. This is like like if I was gonna, if it was your job to condition somebody out of violence using Holocaust imagery, it just feels, it feels intentionally like, yeah, of course they would try that, because they don't really understand the nature of violence. They read about violence in a textbook, and they read like, what's the most violent thing that's ever happened, and the answer was the Holocaust.
I like that. Yeah. Bishop does ask, did the book start the strap the person to a chair and make them watch brainwashing movies trope? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't recall ever seeing something like that prior to watching the movie, which is, of course, based on the book. So possibly. I don't know.
Yeah. I actually really like what Appy is saying about Alex feeling like a purely impulsive character.
Yeah.
And sort of identifying with that. I think what's funny about me is I've never been impulsive. I've always had this isn't sarcasm. I've to a fault. I've always like checked every action that I take according to 10 different parameters, and it's exhausting. And I wish I wasn't this way. But
to be clear, I'm laughing not because I think it's funny, but because I know you're being 100% accurate in your statement there.
Yeah. So I can't really identify with it, but like, yeah, totally. That's the one fascinating characteristic of Alex is he does so many things in the book where you're just like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
And it is just like in the moment it was sounded fun to him,
Yeah. Yeah.
and the consequences are just horrible, and that happens over and over, and that's just
Mm-hmm.
that's being 15, I guess. If you're like Alex anyway, and not
Yeah.
like me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. Anything else you wanted to say about Clockwork Orange? Just lovely book. Really, I can't. I want to emphasize once again, like if you've listened to only part of this conversation, if you're picking up here at the end and you haven't read the book and you've kind of stayed away because of this perception of deep darkness and uncomfortableness of the book, I just don't think that's there. Again, there are very, very disturbing things that happen in this book, but the way the book frames them, like it's not really meant to disturb you in that way, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I just gonna mention Pulp Fiction for the third time. It's meant to be
Yeah.
like gratuitous for the sake of being like fun.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was gonna say the last comment is one time for Halloween I dressed up like Alex and his droogs, and I had the hat and the suspenders and the jock strap and the eyelash, and I looked
You're
real horror show, folks.
you're exactly the part of the problem that DJ was talking about
I
here.
know.
That in the '90s, the pop
D-
culture of Clockwork Orange was glorifying the violence.
DJ reminded me that I had done that, so thanks, DJ.
Well, of course, for the rest of time, we will know that the Droogs from A Clockwork Orange, most famously seen in the hit movie Space Jam, with LeBron James in it. I I wish I was lying. I fucking wish I was lying, but I'm not.
Oh my God.
That freaking movie, yeah.
You know, I don't know if I have a picture of this because this was in the age before everything was photographed all the time by
Yeah,
everyone.
we didn't have a camera in our pocket at all times, so.
Yep. Yep.
I still don't take a lot of pictures. Like I was at a wedding last weekend, and I got back, and my father-in-law was like, "You have to show us some pictures sometime," and I was like,
Yeah.
got like one, I think.
Yeah. I'm sure somebody took pictures.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was definitely a photographer there.
Yeah.
It wasn't me.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's gonna do it then. This was a great conversation. Thank you all for participating. That was a lot of fun. And thank you for the person that said I'm handsome. Okay. Don't see that. Don't see that every day.
Well deserved.
Yeah. I think. Thanks, man. As we said, we are not going to be having a book club next month because I'm taking the month off to raise a small child and hopefully not turn them into an Alex. So that's going to be my goal for the next 18 years or so. But I'm going to take 2 weeks off to really prime myself for that goal, and then we'll be back to podcasting. But we will be back in October. I'm going to select the book. I think I have a couple ideas. I have an idea, Matt, of doing a longer book, and then we can announce it like Monday, and then we could have 2 months to read the longer book. I think that might be fun. So I'm gonna chat with Matt offline about that, and we'll possibly make an announcement sometime next week. But once again, no book in September. We'll be back at the very end of October for our next book.
Good to hear that, Eddie. Glad you enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, that's great to hear. To me, this is what the book club is about. It's about Matt and I getting to finally have an excuse to read books that we really should have read a long time ago, or sometimes read books that we never would have picked up. But we want this to be that for other people too. I think a lot of times in our votes on Patreon and on here, people end up just voting for the book they know and they've read before, and they're like, "Oh, I like that book. I want to listen to them talk about it," which is great. I'm not telling you don't do that, but also we do want people to experience new books and get to read them first time with us.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much, everyone. All your nice words. Thank you. If you happen to be listening to the audio-only version of this, please join us in a couple months in October. You can see here we do interact with the chat as much as possible. We like doing it. We like doing this live. So hopefully you can join us live if you haven't gotten the chance to do it in the past.
Yeah, if you like what we do here at Doof Media and you want to see more of it, then please head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and consider donating to support our organization. Another cool thing you'll get is the ability to vote for the books that we talk about on this show. I mean, with the exception of next month, obviously.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, you get a say in which book we cover. And you can also, and anyone can actually suggest books for us to consider.
Correct.
that's free. So yeah, go check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have any questions or comments or just want to reach out to us and say, hey, you can always find us over on x.com at doofmedia or email us at doofmedia@gmail.com. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That's it for us. We will see you folks in a couple months. Enjoy your fall. We'll see you after Halloween. Bye, everybody. Okay, my voice is going, so I'm gonna shut it down.
Sounds good. Good night, everybody.